It was just another Wednesday morning at Oak Ridge High, a prestigious school nestled in the heart of Texas. The sun had barely risen, but the campus was already buzzing. Students in neatly pressed uniforms hurried through the halls, clutching coffee cups and comparing notes for their upcoming tests. Among them walked 16-year-old Eli Turner, a quiet boy with rough hands and dusty boots that didn't quite match the school's polished floors. He came from a long line of farmers and started every morning at 4 a.m., feeding cattle and hauling hay before catching the bus to school. His calloused palms and sunburned neck were evidence of a life few of his classmates could understand. Eli didn't mind being different. What he did mind was how others treated him for it, especially Mrs. Danvers, his history teacher. She had a sharp tongue, sharper heels, and an ego that filled the room before she even stepped inside. To her, students like Eli weren't worth the air they breathed. She favored those from wealthy families, the ones who wore designer backpacks and came to school in Teslas. That morning, Eli quietly took his seat in the back. He hadn't slept well. There was a pop quiz, and he hadn't had time to study. His eyes were heavy. His notebook, half empty. Mrs. Danvers walked in, her heels clicking against the tile. She scanned the room like a hawk, then landed on Eli. Turner, she snapped. Did the cows keep you up last night again? Or is laziness just a family trait? Laughter erupted around him. Eli looked down, humiliated. He didn't know it yet, but that moment would change everything. Eli clenched his fists beneath the desk, his knuckles turning pale. The laughter from his classmates echoed in his ears, louder than the ticking clock on the wall. He wanted to speak up, to defend himself, but years of being silenced by people like Mrs. Danvers had taught him that staying quiet was sometimes easier. She walked over to his desk, holding up his half-completed quiz. "This is unacceptable," she said, voice dripping with contempt. "You think you'll get anywhere in life with this kind of effort?" Eli didn't reply. He stared at the paper, the red ink bleeding through it like a wound. "Maybe you should drop this class," she continued. "Actually, maybe you should drop out of school altogether. Some people just aren't cut out for academics. Maybe farming's your limit." That last line made the class go silent. Even the students who usually laughed at her jokes now looked unsure. The words had crossed a line, but Mrs. Danvers didn't care. Eli finally stood up. His voice was calm, but firm. "I work before school. Every day. I don't have time for tutors or fancy textbooks. But that doesn't mean I'm less than anyone else here." Mrs. Danvers raised an eyebrow. "Then prove it. Right now." "I'm not here to prove anything to you," Eli said. "I just want to be treated with respect." The room was frozen. Tension hung in the air. "Then leave," she said coldly, pointing to the door. "You're dismissed. Permanently." Eli paused for a moment, then quietly gathered his things and walked out. No one said a word. Outside the classroom, his face burned with humiliation, but deep inside, something else had started to rise, something stronger. Word of Eli's expulsion spread faster than wildfire. By lunchtime, every hallway in Oak Ridge High buzzed with whispers. Some students recounted the moment like a scene from a drama. Others questioned whether Mrs. Danvers had gone too far. A few even felt guilty. They'd laughed when they should have spoken up. Eli sat alone on a bench outside the school gate, his backpack at his feet. He didn't cry. He didn't storm off. He just stared at the horizon, the morning sun now high and hot above the trees. His silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. Back home, the news reached the Turner farm before Eli even did. His grandfather, Samuel Turner, stood at the edge of the cornfield, wiping sweat from his brow as he took the call. The old man said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked out over the rows of crops he'd built his life around. "They humiliated my grandson for being a farmer's boy?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "All right." Back at school, Mrs. Danvers stood in the teacher's lounge, sipping coffee smugly. "Some kids just don't belong," she muttered to a colleague. This one thought hard work in the dirt meant something. As if plowing a field teaches you to read. No one challenged her. Meanwhile, Eli returned home and quietly helped with the chores like always. He didn't tell his grandfather what had happened. He didn't have to. That night, Samuel Turner sat at his old wooden desk, pulled out a leather-bound book of contacts, and made a single call. His voice was clear that I need the chopper ready by dawn. We've got a school to visit. Eli didn't know it yet, but the next day would rewrite everything. The next morning, Oakridge High began just like any other. Students dragged their feet through the halls, teachers prepared for lectures, and Mrs. Danvers adjusted the pins in her bun while reviewing her lesson plan. The buzz around Eli Turner had begun to fade, until the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades shattered the calm. It started as a faint thrum, barely noticeable, but within seconds, it grew louder, vibrating through the windows. Students rushed to the nearest ones, pressing their faces to the glass. Teachers paused mid-sentence. Conversations died mid-word. A sleek black helicopter descended onto the football field, its powerful rotors whipping up grass and dust. Security guards scrambled. Phones came out. Someone screamed, "Is that the FBI?" Mrs. Danvers frowned, stepping out of her classroom just as the helicopter door opened. Out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored jacket, his silver hair swept back, his presence commanding. Samuel Turner walked like a man used to owning the ground he stepped on. But it wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. Behind him followed Eli, his boots still dusty, but his posture straighter than ever. The two walked side by side, not saying a word as the entire school stared in disbelief. Mrs. Danvers stepped into the hallway, her jaw tightening. "What is the meaning of this?" she asked a nearby administrator, her voice uneasy. No one answered. Samuel Turner entered the front office without knocking. "I need to speak to the principal," he said. "Yes sir, right this way," stammered the secretary. The students gathered by the doors, watching silently. Nobody made a joke. Nobody laughed. Eli glanced around the hallway. This time, heads didn't turn away from him, they turned toward him, and for the first time, they saw him differently. Principal Hastings rose from his chair the moment Samuel Turner entered his office. Though he'd only met the man once at a school fundraiser, he recognized him instantly. Samuel wasn't just a farmer, he was the owner of one of the most successful sustainable agriculture businesses in Texas. His company had contracts with national grocery chains and had donated heavily to the school's agricultural sciences wing. Mr. Turner, what a surprise, the principal said, extending a hand. Samuel didn't shake it. "I'm here about my grandson," he said. "Eli Turner. He was expelled yesterday by one of your teachers. I want to know why." Principal Hastings looked flustered. "Well, I wasn't informed of an expulsion. That would require my sign-off." Samuel nodded slowly, his eyes like stone. "Then let's get her in here and hear what she has to say." Moments later, Mrs. Danvers entered the room, composed but visibly uneasy. She smiled politely. "Mr. Turner. I wasn't aware Eli was your grandson." Samuel didn't return the smile. "Would it have made a difference?" She opened her mouth to respond but paused. Samuel continued. "You publicly humiliated him. For being the grandson of a farmer. You mocked his family, his upbringing, and dismissed his right to be here. Do you treat all your students this way, or just the ones who don't come from money?" Mrs. Danvers stiffened. "I hold all my students to a high standard." "You hold them under your shoe," Samuel shot back. He reached into his coat and placed a folded check on the desk. "This school's history department, your department, is largely funded by this check. But I don't fund bigotry." He turned to Principal Hastings. "If this is the culture you allow, my support ends today." Mrs. Danvers paled. Eli stood behind his grandfather, silent, but no longer small. The door clicked shut behind Mrs. Danvers as she left the office, her face as pale as the papers on her clipboard. The confrontation had rattled her. The usual sharpness in her voice was gone, replaced by a silence that seemed to follow her down the hall. Inside the office, Principal Hastings sat rigid, the check still lying untouched on the desk. Samuel Turner didn't care about its value. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement. "My grandson wakes up before dawn to work the land," Samuel said, his voice steady. "While some of these kids are still asleep, he's feeding livestock and plowing fields. That's not weakness. That's grit. And if you let your staff shame him for it, you're failing as educators." Eli stood beside him, quiet but no longer shrinking under the weight of judgment. He wasn't just the farmer's grandson today, he was the reason the school had paused. Principal Hastings nodded slowly. "Mr. Turner, I'm truly sorry. This isn't the message we want to send. Eli will be reinstated immediately." "That's not enough," Samuel said. "I want a public apology." In the same classroom she humiliated him. The principal hesitated, she made a show of his shame. "Now let her make a show of respect," Samuel added. Outside, students had gathered in clusters. The hallway chatter buzzed with every new rumor. Was that really Eli's grandfather? "Did you see that chopper? He just walked into the school like he owned it." Back in the hallway, Eli walked past a group of classmates. For the first time, no one sneered. No one laughed. Instead, a few offered nods. One girl gave him a thumbs up. Respect was growing, and not because of money or power. It was because Eli hadn't bowed to shame. The next morning, students filed into Mrs. Danvers' history class with an unusual tension in the air. Whispers bounced between rows of desks. Phones were tucked away, not out of obedience, but because something more interesting was about to happen in real life. Eli walked in, not to sit quietly in the back, but to stand near the front, beside the principal. Mrs. Danvers entered moments later, her usual confident stride replaced by a slower, more careful pace. Her eyes scanned the room, then settled on the principal, and then on Eli. She looked smaller than usual, her sharp edges dulled. Principal Hastings cleared his throat. "Before we begin today's lesson, there's something that must be addressed." He nodded to Mrs. Danvers. She turned to the class. "Yesterday, I spoke to Eli Turner in a way that was disrespectful and unprofessional. I allowed my personal bias to cloud my judgment, and I humiliated a student who deserved better." A hush fell over the room. "I've always believed in discipline and standards," she continued, "but I lost sight of what truly matters: respect, dignity, and recognizing effort, even if it doesn't come wrapped in perfect grades or polished shoes." She looked directly at Eli. "Eli, I'm sorry." Eli nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice didn't shake. He didn't gloat. He didn't have to. The moment wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every student who had felt small, judged, or ignored for reasons beyond their control. Mrs. Danvers stepped aside. The principal placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "You have more strength than most adults I know," he said quietly. As class began, the atmosphere was different. The respect in the room wasn't forced or polite. It was earned. The days that followed Eli's public reconciliation with Mrs. Danvers brought about more change than anyone could have expected. At Oak Ridge High, news traveled faster than gossip, and the word about the farmer's son stood as a silent challenge to the school's unspoken rules. Teachers began to treat their students differently, especially those from backgrounds like Eli's. They became more attentive, not just to grades but to the character of their students, realizing that success wasn't solely measured by test scores or fancy resumes. Eli didn't become a school hero. He didn't need to. His power lay in his silence, in his refusal to be made small. He walked through the halls with his head held high, not because he had a grandfather who owned a helicopter, but because he had earned the right to. The whispers continued, but they weren't mocking anymore. Now, they were laced with admiration. One afternoon, as Eli walked across campus, a boy from the football team, who had once been one of the loudest to laugh at his expense, approached him. "Hey, Turner," the boy said awkwardly. I just wanted to say, respect. What you did, standing up for yourself. That was cool." Eli gave him a small smile. "Thanks." As he kept walking, Eli realized something. Respect, the kind that was truly earned, was more than just an apology. It was a change in how people saw you, and, more importantly, how they saw themselves. Eli's story was no longer just about one person. It was about a school, about a community, that had learned a powerful lesson. They had witnessed the strength of character and the value of humility. And for once, it wasn't about what you had, but who you were, and that was enough. The following week, the entire school gathered in the gym for an assembly. It wasn't the usual back-to-school meeting or pep rally, it was different, more personal. Principal Hastings stood at the podium, his expression serious but not harsh. We've all seen a transformation here in the past few days, he began. A transformation that reminds us of why we're here, not just to learn facts from books, but to learn how to be better people. How to lift each other up, not tear each other down. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the students. This assembly is about something we often forget, respect. And what it means to truly respect one another. He paused and turned slightly, nodding toward Eli, who sat in the front row. Eli Turner showed us that respect isn't about titles or wealth. It's not about where you come from or what your parents do. It's about character. Hard work. Integrity. And the courage to stand up when you're wronged. The room was silent, but not in a way that felt uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding. The kind of silence you feel when something important is being said. Principal Hastings continued. I want to publicly apologize for failing Eli, and for allowing a culture to exist where students could feel that their worth was measured by anything other than their actions. He then turned to Mrs. Danvers, who stood next to him. Mrs. Danvers has also apologized for her actions, and I believe that we all can learn from this. Eli stood up, his hands in his pockets. I don't need special treatment. I just want to be treated like anyone else. Respect is something that's earned, not given. And I've earned it. The gym erupted into applause. It wasn't just for Eli, it was for everyone in that room, because for the first time, they all saw that what really mattered was how they treated one another, and that day, something in the school shifted. It wasn't just the students who changed, it was the culture. A culture of respect was born. The weeks that followed Eli's public apology and the assembly were filled with quiet but significant change. Oak Ridge High began to feel different. The students, once divided by invisible lines of status, wealth, and judgment, now moved through the halls with a newfound respect for one another. Eli became a quiet symbol of strength. He wasn't the loudest, and he didn't seek attention. But everywhere he went, he carried himself with a calm confidence that was undeniable. His story had inspired more than just his classmates, it had sparked a ripple effect throughout the school. One afternoon, as Eli worked on a group project in the library, a girl from his history class approached him. She was someone who had never really spoken to him before, but now her demeanor was different, respectful. Eli, I just wanted to say. I've always kind of judged people based on where they came from. But after everything that happened, I realized I was wrong. Eli looked up from his work, giving her a small, genuine smile. It's all right. It happens. I'm sorry, she said, then paused. And thanks. Eli nodded, returning his focus to the project, but inside, something warmed. She wasn't the first to apologize, and she wouldn't be the last. The school was changing, slowly but surely, one small act of respect at a time. As the year went on, Eli's relationship with his classmates improved. Not because they saw his grandfather's wealth or his family's land, but because they saw him as someone who stood by his principles. They saw him as someone who could have easily taken the easy way out, running away, being embarrassed, and letting the world define him. But Eli didn't. He chose to rise, and in doing so, he taught them all something invaluable. Respect isn't about status or wealth, it's about standing firm in who you are, even when the world tells you to be less. That lesson stayed with Oak Ridge High long after Eli graduated, and it was something that would echo in the halls for years to come. If Eli's story inspired you, remember that true strength comes from standing up for yourself and others, no matter where you come from. Respect is earned through actions, not status. Drop a comment below sharing how you've earned respect in your own life, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire change, challenge the status quo, and show the power of standing strong.